Hey guys, welcome back to Mo's Game Table. Today we're going to take a look inside Liberia Descent into Hell. It is a Counter-Strike minigame from Fiery Dragon Games. It is designed by Ben Madison and Wes Ernie. It is out of print, but I was able to finally get a hold of a copy of this. This is a game I've been wanting, one of the games from this Counter-Strike series that I've been wanting to get hold of. And that cover should be a good indicator of being very fitting to the title, Liberia Descent into Hell. You've got a blood-covered grown man and next to a young boy wearing sunglasses and carrying a weapon in himself. This was a terrible, terrible civil war. A very fascinating piece of history due to how brutal it was, but just a very terrible conflict. And yes, there were boy soldiers in this as well. It's just one of those pieces of history that a lot of people don't know of, and it's very recent in our times. From 1989 to 1997, there was a terrible civil war in Liberia, and you can actually check out some documentaries on YouTube about it. The best one I would recommend, if you're not familiar with this conflict, is the one by Vice. They really do an excellent hour-long, I think it is, documentary that goes into what happened, and you'll actually see some of the people that are in this game that they'll talk with as well. But let's take a look at the back of the box and see what this is all about. It says Liberia Descent into Hell is a simulation game on the Liberian Civil War 1989 to 1997. The game is for two players, one representing President Samuel Doe's Armed Forces of Liberia and its allied factions, the government player, and the other, the insurgent forces of Charles Taylor and his allies, the rebel player. The object of the game is to control enough territory and resources at the end of the game to win a post-war election and become the undisputed president of Liberia. The contents of the game: you get a color rulebook, 288 die-cut counters, a color area map, charts and tables, 2 dice. It is a medium complexity. Map scale is 1 inch equals 20 miles. Unit scale is 500 soldiers or 1 leader. Time scale 6 months per turn. 2 players. Solitaire suitability is high, and playing time is 2+ hours. That is a look inside, or what's inside the box. Now we'll actually take a look inside and see what we get. We've got our 2d6 there, nice small 2d6. Then we've got our color rulebook, which is pretty fantastic given this is a small game, a mini game. You get a coil bound book that has thick cardstock cover and back, but we'll come back to that in a couple minutes. This is what I was talking about with small footprint. The size of this map is pretty indicative of that. It's area movement and just very, manageable on a table, extremely small. You've got the country of Liberia, bordered by Sierra Leone, Republic of Guinea, and Ivory Coast. All of the areas inside the country are all color-coded and broken down by white borders. And then you have Monrovia here, which is broken down into about 7 sections, it looks like. The mangrove swamp and then the actual urban areas around it as well. But that is the map that comes with the game. And then we've got a whole bunch of other things. Let's just pop these all out so I can go through these with you. We've got this is the list of games from Fiery Dragon in this Counter-Strike series. There are a few of these that I actually want to get a hold of. They've been they kind of pop up from time to time on the secondary market. You just have to keep an eye out for them, and that's how I got this one. Now we've got 3 counter sheets, half-inch counters. Not bad for a $20 game. Full color. You've got government control and President Doe's forces here, the blue, and then you've got another leader, Boley, it looks like, LPC, and then Ag Chroma right here. And you've got Ignu Black Berets, U.S. Marines, Nigeria, Guinea, Tanzania, Sierra Leone, Uganda, Ghana, Senegal, Nigeria, all these different national flags. I'm going to assume that's national forces or maybe control markers. I'm not sure. It looks like they've got to be national forces given that they have strength numbers on them. But then you have some admin counters as well, peace talks, game turn, Echo Mog, which I think that was UN, if I remember correctly. Then you have Charles Taylor and his forces here, broken down, and then Rebel Control, and Johnson and his group of troops as well, and then you've got hostages, a library, and then you've got some other counters here. These are interesting. They've broken down into men and kids, and also have different locations. Sierra Leone, not sure if there's any other things, but they're names, if there's any other countries, but there's names in it. And look down here, and you've got transvestites. And this is what I was talking about before, about how this was such a, it's a terribly tragic Civil War, but it's also fascinating in the actors in the war and what went on. So like I said, I would recommend checking out the video. But these guys would go into battle. Some of them would actually go in. There was a guy, General Butt Naked was his name. These guys all use like war names, and this guy, General Butt Naked, he would go in with his troops completely naked into battle, because they would believe that by going into battle, he was impervious to enemy rounds. Bullets would just bounce off him or just ignore him altogether. But very unique, interesting, fascinating, and terribly tragic all at the same time. Definitely worth checking out. Here's your turn record track, donor aid track, Echo Mog forces, boxes. Then you've got peace talk and factions track. A lot of tracks in this game. Omnibus markers track, checkpoint table rules, and Juju level adjustments summary. Yes, you read that right. Juju. These guys would believe there was like weird rituals that these guys would go through, figuring that they can get Juju that they could take into battle with them, that would protect them from harm and also bring terror and damage to their enemies. Then you have recruitment displays, Echo Mog, national force pools. We still got a couple more to go here. And then you've got the random events table, and there are a bunch of events that you can get that you can have in this game. And they are all single-sided. And then we have finally the sequence of play card. This is on cardstock. The rest of these are all glossy paper, but quality level is pretty fantastic, I think, for a $20 game. Now we'll just have to see how the gameplay is, and we'll take a look inside the rule book. Given Ben Madison is the designer, I would expect it's going to be quite an interesting game to play. If you've ever played any of his games, you'll know what I'm talking about. So we've got introduction, game components, counters, faction leaders, the ethnic fighters, and this goes through right here what we saw in some of these counters, like Gambian, Americo, Burkina, Geo. All these are explained here, these different tribes, what they are, and that'll explain to you what those counters signify. And then here we got kids, men, and vets. All ethnic units are designated as one of three different strength levels. 213 units are kids, otherwise known as child fighters. 124 are men, and 335 are vets, which are experienced veterans. And that's how it explains why there's different counter strengths on those for the different troops. Then you have your random events phase, peacekeeping phase, political phase, talking about different ways that they are making money, like the drug trade. Burkina Faso, there was a Marxist proletarian wonderland. This guy was a personal friend of Taylor and hoped to influence post-war Liberia. French treat much of West Africa as if it were still a French colony. They dominate the local trade in hardwoods and other resources. And then we've got Lebanese. Prostitution is actually in here as well. Sex trade in Liberia is enormous, and tens of thousands of Liberian girls and women work in European brothels. Ecomog, especially the Ghanaians, also had their hands in this. It's just interesting to see how much of this conflict is modeled here just from scrolling through this rule book. You have your economic phase, pulse phase. You can actually retreat before combat, emergency leader deployments, and then you get into combat itself and how that works. You have your leaders in combat, your combat results, retreat, and another terrible part of this conflict and another part of the fascination that people have with it is cannibalism is actually talked about as well, because that was definitely a big part of this conflict. It says here, as noted above in Rule 8.4, leaders can be killed. If your forces succeed in killing an enemy leader in combat, you must choose to either bury his body or to cannibalize him, eat his heart, and or drink his blood. If you bury him, which may include giving his body back to the family, you get $1d6 from the grateful family. If you cannibalize him, you get as many juju points as the dead leader's total firepower. Offensive plus defensive. You're perceived by Liberians as having magically acquired his juju. So this, it sounds kind of like fantasy, but it's not. It is, but it's not. It is fantasy because by eating someone, you're not going to get any juju from them that's going to save you or anything. But these people believe this, really truly believe this. And this did affect the way they performed in combat. So I find it very interesting that nothing seems to be off the table here with this game, and is modeled in here to try to respect the conflict as much as possible. You've got supply, how to win. Then you have optional rules. A couple pages of optional rules, several pages of optional rules, and you have your faction leader names, and a list of all the different leaders in the conflict here, and then designer's notes from the designers who give you a few pages of designer's notes that will explain their thinking in dealing with this subject. It is a terribly tragic conflict, but one that is also fascinating from a historical standpoint, and it's just one of those ones that it's one of those subjects that it can be almost kind of difficult to talk about for a war game, but that's one of the things we war game for, is to learn about history, and those pieces of history that would be kind of a sideshow if it wasn't for a game like this to bring that out to people and educate them as far as to what happened with this conflict. And but that is Liberia Descent into Hell. It's a Counter-Strike minigame from Fiery Dragon Games, and if this is something you're interested in, you're going to have to look on the secondary market for it, because this is no longer in print, to the best of my knowledge. I'm not sure if anybody has picked up the rights or if that will be published by anyone else, but like I said, secondary market, you can find them. Interesting series of games that covers pretty much everything from space down to fantasy, down to here on Earth, and some very unique subjects like this one, Liberia. Thanks a lot for tuning in, guys. See you next time.